Hello, guys. Welcome to a new Twitch channel, if we can call it that. Some new graphics, kindly provided by my daughter Wolfie and Battlestorm. Love you guys. Uh huh. Can you guys hear it? Is it too loud? Too soft? Has it? It has not even uploaded the new emotes that I wanted. I actually uploaded the chocolate and the other wine. Yay! What? Hey, Jay. No, I can. Turn it up a bit. Is it better? Well, I did turn it up now, so is it better? Okay, good, 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 good. So, yeah, no worries, Jay. Work comes first. Good. We have come to chapter 14 in Sarah J. Maas's book, Throne of Glass. Are you guys ready? You guys, you need to keep me awake today. I haven't slept much. Oi! For the next 4 days, Selina awoke before dawn to train in her room, using whatever she could to exercise. No, no more militaries, please. No more. Chairs, the doorway, even her billiard table and cue sticks. The balls made for remarkable balance tools. Around dawn, KL usually showed up for breakfast. Afterward, they ran through the game park, where he kept pace at her side. Autumn had fully come, and the wind smelled of crisp leaves and snow. Kale never said anything when she doubled over, hands on her knees, and vomited up her breakfast. Nor did he comment on the fact that she could go farther and farther each day without stopping for breath. Once they finished their run, they trained in a private room far from her competitors' eyes. Until, that is, she collapsed to the ground and cried that she was about to die of hunger and fatigue. At lessons, the knives remained Selina's favorite, but the wooden staff. Aw, thank you, Wolfie, coming in with a host. Love you, sweetie. But the wooden staff became dear. Naturally, it had to do with the fact that she could freely whack him and not chop off an arm. Since her initial meeting with the Princess Nehemia, she hadn't seen or heard from the princess, not even chatter from the servants. Kale always came for lunch, and afterward she joined the other champions for a few more hours of training under Brullo's watchful eye. Most of their training was just to make sure they could actually use weapons. And, of course, she kept her head down throughout it all, doing enough to keep Brullo from critiquing her, but not enough to make him praise her the way he did Cain. Remember, guys? She got told by Kale not to show any exception that how good she was. Cain, how she loathed him. Brullo practically worshipped the man, and even the other champions nodded their respect when he passed by. No one bothered to comment on how perfect her form was. Was this how the other assassins at the Assassin's Keep had felt all those years she had spent hogging Arobin Hamel's attention? But here it was hard to focus when Cain was nearby, taunting, sneering, waiting for her to make one mistake. Hopefully he wouldn't distract her at the first elimination test. Brullo hadn't given them any indication what they might be tested for, and Kale was just as clueless. The day before the first test, she knew something was wrong, long before she got to the training hall. Kale hadn't shown up for breakfast, but rather sent her guards to bring her to the training hall to practice on her own. He didn't show up for lunch either, and by the time she was escorted to the hall, she was brimming with questions. Without Kale to stand near, she lingered beside a pillar, watching the competitors file in, flanked by guards and their trainers. Brullo wasn't there yet, another oddity, and there were far too many guards in the training hall today. What do you suppose this is about? Knox Owen, the young thief from Parenth, asked from beside her. After proving himself somewhat skilled during practice, many of the other competitors had sought him out, but he still opted to keep to himself. Captain Westfall didn't train me this morning, she offered. What was the harm in admitting that? Knox held out his hand. Knox Owen. I know who you are, she said, but shook his hand anyway. Aw, Click coming in with a subscription from Twitch Prime. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys. Yeah, what? I know who you are, she said, but shook his hand anyway. His grip was solid, his hand calloused and scarred. He'd seen his fair share of action. Good. I felt a bit invisible with that hulking lout showing off these past few days. He jerked his chin towards Cain, who was in the middle of the examination, his bulging biceps. A large ring of black, iridescent stone glimmering on Cain's finger. Strange that he wear it to practice, Knox went on. Did you see Verin? He looks like he's going to be sick. He pointed to the loudmouthed thief that Selena wanted to knock out cold. Normally, Verin could be found near Cain, taunting the other champions, but today he stood alone by the window, face pale and eyes wide. I heard him talking to Cain, said a timid voice behind them, and they found Pillar, the youngest assassin, standing nearby. She had spent half a day watching Pillar, and while she only pretended to be mediocre, he truly could use the training. Assassin indeed. His voice hasn't even depended yet. How did he wind up here? What'd he say? Knox put his hand in his pocket. His clothes weren't as ratty as the other competitors. The mere fact that she'd actually heard his name implied he must have been a good thief in Peranth. Pillar's freckled fa- Try again. Pillar's freckled face paled a bit. Bill Chaston, the eye-eater, was found stone cold dead this morning. A champion was dead? And a notorious killer at that? How? She demanded. Pillar swallowed hard. Varen said it wasn't pretty, like someone ripped him wide open. He passed the body on his way here. Knox cursed under his breath, and Selina studied the other champions. A hush had fallen on the group, and clusters of them stood together whispering. Varen's story was spreading fast. Pillar went on. He said Chastain's body was in ribbons. A chill snaked down his spine, but she shook her head, just as the guard entered and told them that Brullo had ordered them to have free rein of the training hall today, and to practice what they wanted. Needing to distract herself from the image forming in her mind, she didn't bother to say goodbye to Knox and Pillar as she strode to the weapons rack and gathered a belt strapped with throwing knives. She took up a place near the archery targets. Knox joined her a moment later and started firing his knives at the target. He hit the second ring, but never got any closer to the center. His skill with knives wasn't nearly as good as his archery. She drew a dagger from the belt. Who would have killed one of the champions so brutally, and how have they gotten away with it, if the body was in the hall? This castle was swarming with guards. A champion was dead, and just a day before their first test. Would this start a pattern? Her folk... Aw, thank you for the follow, Click. You're sweet. Her focus narrowed to the small black dot in the center of the target. She steadied her breathing as she cocked her arm, letting her wrist go loose. The sounds of the other champions faded. The blackness of the bullseye beckoned, and as she exhaled, she sent the dagger flying. It sparkled, a shooting star of steel. She smiled grimly as it struck home. Beside her, Knox swore colorfully when his dagger hit the third ring on his target, and her smile broadened, despite the shredded corpse that lay somewhere in the castle. Selina drew another dagger, but paused as Varen called to her from the ring, where he sparred with Cain. Circus tricks ain't much use when you are the king's champion. She shifted his gaze to him, but kept positioned toward the target. You better be off your back, learning tricks useful to a woman. In fact, I can teach you some tonight, if you like. He laughed, and Cain joined with him. Selina gripped the hilt of the dagger so hard that it hurt. Don't listen to them, Knox murmured. He tossed another dagger, missing the bullseye again. They wouldn't know the first thing to do with a woman even if one walked stark naked into their bedroom. Selina threw her dagger, and the blade clanged as it landed a hair's breadth from the one she'd already embedded in the bullseye. Knox's dark brows rose, accentuating his gray eyes. He couldn't have been older than 25. You got impressive aim. For a girl? She challenged. No, he said, and threw another dagger. For anyone. The dagger yet again missed the mark. He stalked to the target, yanking out all 6 daggers and shoving them in their sheaths before returning to the throwing line. Selina cleared her throat. You're standing wrong, she said. Quiet. Oh, shit. You're standing wrong, she's actually whispering. She said quietly enough to the other champion couldn't hear. And you're holding your wrist incorrectly. Knox lowered his arm. She took up her stance. Legs like this, she said. He studied her for a moment, then positioned his legs similarly. Bend slightly at the knees, shoulders back. Loosen your wrist. Throw when you exhale. She demonstrated for him, and her dagger found its mark. Show me again, Knox said appreciatively. She did so, and struck the target. Then she threw with her left hand, and fought her whoop of triumph as the blade sank into the handle of another dagger. Knox focused on the target as he brought up his arm. Well, you've just put me to shame, he said, laughing under his breath as he lifted his dagger higher. Keeps your wrist even looser, was her reply. It's all about how you snap it. Knox obeyed, and as he exhaled a long breath, his dagger flew. It didn't hit the bullseye, but it came within the inner circle. His brows rose. That's a bit of an improvement. Just a bit, she said, and held her ground as he gathered their knives from the 2 targets and handed hers back. She sheathed them in her belt. You're from Peranth, right? She asked. Though she'd never been to Peranth, Terrassen's second largest city, the mention of her homeland still spiked a bolt of fear and guilt. It had been 10 years since the royal family had been butchered, 10 years since the King of Ardenland had marched his army, 10 years since Terrassen met its doom with bowed heads and silence. She shouldn't have mentioned it. She didn't know why she mentioned it, actually. She schooled her features into polite interest as Knox added, This is my first time out of Peranth, actually. You said you were from Belhaven, didn't you? My father is a merchant, she lied. And what does he think about a daughter who steals jewels for a living? She conceded a smile and hurled a knife into the target. He won't be inviting me home for a while, that's for certain. Oh, she's very cocky, huh? Ah, you're in good hands, though. You got the best trainer out of anyone. I've seen you 2 running at dawn. I have to beg mine to put down the bottle and let me train outside of lessons. He inclined his head toward his trainer, who sat against the wall, the hood of his cape over his eyes, sleeping, yet again. The captain of the guard is a pain in my ass at times, she said, chucking another knife. But you're right, he is the best. Knox was quiet for a moment before he said, The next time we pair off for lessons, find me, will you? Why? She reached for another dagger, but found she depleted her stock again. Knox threw another dagger, and it hit the bullseye this time. Because my goal's on you winning this whole damn thing. She smiled a little. Let's hope you won't be eliminated at the test tomorrow. She scanned the training hall for any signs of the challenge to come the following morning, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The other competitors remained mostly quiet, save for Kane and Verin. Can you guys remove that, please? Thank you. And many of them were pale as snow. And let's hope neither of us wind up like the Eye Eater, she added, and meant it. Yeah, that's good, Banhammer. Don't you ever do anything other than read, said Kale. She started from her chair on the balcony as he took a seat beside her. The late afternoon sunlight warmed her face, and the last balmy breeze of autumn rushed through her unbound hair. She stuck out her tongue. Shouldn't you be looking into the Eye Eater's murder? He never came to her rooms after lunch. Something dark flitted across his eyes. That's none of your business. And don't try to pry details from me about it, he added as she opened her mouth. Yeah. Posture check. Done. He pointed to the book in her lap. I saw at lunch that you were reading The Wind and the Rain, and I forgot to ask what you thought. He'd really come to talk about a book when a champion's corpse had been found that morning? It's a bit dense, she admitted, holding up the brown volume in her lap. When he didn't reply, she asked, Why are you really here? I had a long day. She massaged an ache in her knee. Because of Bill's murder? Because the prince dragged me into a council meeting that lasted for 3 hours, he said, a muscle in his jaw feathering. I thought His Royal Highness was your friend. He is. How long have you been friends? He paused, and she knew he was contemplating how she might use the information against him, weighing the risk of telling her the truth. She was about to snap at him when he said, Since we were young. We were the only boys of our age in the castle, at least of high rank. We had lessons together, played together, trained together. But when I was 13, my father moved my family back to our home in Aniel. The city on the Silver Lake? It somehow made sense that Kale's family ruled Aniel. The citizens of Aniel were warriors from birth, and had been guardians against the hordes of the wild men, from the White Fang Mountains for generations. Thankfully, things have gotten a little easier for the warriors of Aniel in the past 10 years. The White Fang Mountain men had been one of the first peoples to be put down by Ardalan's conquering armies, and very rarely did the rebels make it to slavery. She'd heard tales of mountain men killing their wives and children, then themselves, rather than be taken by Ardalan. The thought of Kale going up against hundreds of them, against men built like Cain, made her a little sick. Yes, Kale said, fiddling with the long hunting knife at his side. I was slotted to join the royal council like my father. He wanted me to spend some time among my own people and learn. Whatever it councilmen learn. He said that with the king's army now in the mountains, we could move our interest from fighting the mountain folk to politics. His golden eyes were distant, but I missed Rifthold. So you ran away? She marveled that he was volunteering this much. Hadn't he refused to tell her almost anything about himself while traveling from Endovier? Ran away? Gale chuckled. No. Dorian convinced the captain of the guard to take me as his apprentice, with the help of Rollo. My father refused, so I abdicated my title as Lord of Aniel to my brother and left the next day. The captain's silence suggested what he could not say, that his father hadn't objected. What of his mother? He'd loosened a long breath. What about you then? She crossed her arms. I thought you didn't. Oh, sorry. I thought you didn't want to know anything about me. There was a ghost of smile on his face as he watched the sky melt into a smear of tangerine. What do your parents make of their daughter being Ardalan's assassin? My parents are dead, she said. They died when I was 8. So you... Her heart thundered in her chest. I was born in Terrasson, then I became an assassin, then I went to Endovier, and now I'm here. And that's it. Silence fell, then he asked, Where did you get that scar on your right hand? She didn't need to glance at the jagged line that ran along the top of her hand, just above her wrist. She flexed her fingers. When I was 12. Arabin Hamel decided I wasn't nearly as skilled as at swordplay with my left hand. So he gave me a choice. Either he could break my right hand, or I could do it myself. The phantom memory of the blinding pain lanced through her hand. That night I put my hand against the door frame and slammed the door shut on it. It split my hand wide open and broke 2 bones. It took months to heal. Months during which I could only use my left hand. She gave him a vicious smile. I bet Brullo never did that to you. No, he said quietly. No, he didn't. He cleared his throat and stood. The first test is tomorrow. Are you ready? Of course, she lied. He remained standing there for a moment longer, studying her. I'll see you tomorrow morning, he said, and laughed. In the silence that followed in his wake, she contemplated his story, the path that had made them so different but so similar. Okay, sweetie. She wrapped her arms around herself, a cold wind picking up the skirts of her dress and blowing them behind her. All right, guys. Time to take a drink. Be right back. And I'm back, guys. Sorry about that. Phone call as well in the middle of the story time. How dare they? Are you guys ready for chapter 15? Thank you, sweetie. Though she never admitted it, Selena didn't really know what to expect of their first test. With all the training over the past 5 days and fiddling with various weapons and techniques, her body ached. Which was another thing she'd never admit, but even though hiding the throbbing pain in her limbs was nearly impossible. As Selena and Cale entered the giant sparring room in the morning, she glanced at her competitors and remembered she wasn't the only one who hadn't a clue what to expect. A towering black curtain had been swept across half of the room, blocking the other half from sight. Whatever lay beyond that curtain, she realized, was to decide the fate of one of them. The normal ruckus had been replaced by a rustling quiet, and rather than mill about, the competitors lingered by their trainer's side. She kept close to Kale, which wasn't a change from the ordinary, but the sponsors atop the mezzanine looking over the black and white checkered floor were. Her throat tightened as her gaze met with that of the Crown Prince. Aside from sending her his books, she hadn't seen or heard from him since the meeting with the king. He flashed her a grin, those sapphire eyes gleaming in the morning light. She offered him a tight smile in return, and quickly looked away. Brullo stood by the curtain, a scarred hand upon his sword, and Selena studied the scene. Someone stepped to her side. She knew who it was before he spoke. A bit dramatic, don't you think? She glanced sidelong at Knox. Kale tensed next to her, and she could feel him watching the thief closely, no doubt wondering if she and Knox were formulating some escape plan that would include the deaths of every member of the royal family. After 5 days of mindless training, she replied quietly, all too aware that very few people were speaking in the hall, I am glad for a bit of excitement. Knox laughed under his breath. What do you think it is? She shrugged, keeping her attention on the curtain. More and more competitors were arriving, and soon the clock would strike 9, the time when the test would begin. Even if she knew what was behind the curtain, she certainly wouldn't help him. Hopefully it's a pack of man-eating wolves that we have to take on with our bare hands, she looked at him, fully now, and half smile on her lips. Wouldn't that be fun? Kale suddenly cleared his throat. Now was not the time for talking. She stuffed her hands into the pockets of her black pants. Best of luck, she said to Knox, before she strode toward the curtain, Kale following her. When they were far enough away, she asked under her breath, No idea what's behind that curtain? Kale shook his head. She adjusted the thick leather belt slung low across her hips. It was the kind of belt intended to bear the weight of multiple weapons. Its lightness now only reminded her of what she lost and what she had to gain. The death of the Aida yesterday had been fortunate in one aspect, One less man to compete with. She glanced up at Dorian. He could probably see what was behind the curtain from his place on the mezzanine. Why not help her cheat a little? She flicked her attention to the other sponsors, noblemen in fine clothing, and ground her teeth at the sight of Parrington. No one seems to like Parrington, huh? Not even the Crown Prince. He smirked as he watched Kane, who was stretching out his muscled arms. Had he already told Kane what was beyond the curtain? Brullo cleared his throat. "Attention now," he called to them. All of the competitors tried to look calm as he strode to the center of the curtain. "Your first test has arrived." He grinned broadly as if whatever the curtain concealed was going to torment the hell out of them. "As His Majesty has ordered, one of you will be eliminated today. One of you will be deemed worthy. Oh, excuse me, unworthy." Just get on with it, she thought, her jaw clenched tight. As if he read her thoughts, Brollo snapped his fingers, and a guard standing by the wall pulled the curtain back. Inch by inch, it away, until... Selina bit down her laugh. Archery? It was an archery contest. "Rules are simple," Brollo said. Behind him, 5 targets were staggered at various distances through the hall. You get 5 shots, 1 per target. The one with the worst aim goes home. Some competitors began murmuring, but it was all she could do to keep from beaming. Unfortunately, Kane didn't bother to hide his triumphant grin. Why couldn't he have been the champion who was found dead? "You'll go one at a time," Brollo said. And behind them a pair of soldiers rolled out a cart of bows and quivers loaded with arrows. "Form a line on the table to determine your order. The test begins now," Brollo said. She expected them to rush to the long table, stacked with identical bows and arrows, but apparently none of the 21 other competitors were in much of a hurry to go home. Selina made to join the forming line, but Cale grasped her shoulder. "Don't show off," he warned. She smiled sweetly and pried his finger off her. "I'll try not to," she purred, and joined the line. It was an enormous leap of faith to give them arrows, even if the tips were blunted. A dull head wouldn't stop it from going through Parrington's throat, or Dorian's if she wanted. Though the thought was entertaining, she kept her attention on the competitors. With 22 champions and 5 shots each, the test took a dreadfully long time. Thanks to Cale pulling her aside, she'd been in the back of the line. Not dead last, but 3 from the end. Far enough back that she had to watch everyone else go before her, including Kane. The other competitors did well enough. The giant circular targets were composed of 5 colored rings, yellow marking the center, with only a tiny black dot to mark the bullseye. Each target got smaller the farther back it was placed, and because the room was so long, the final target was nearly 70 yards away. It's a regular Robin Hood contest, huh? Selina ran her fingers along the smooth curve of her yew bow. Archery was one of the first skills Arabin had taught her, a staple of any assassin's training. Two of the assassins further proved it was easy, skill shots, though they didn't hit the bullseye, and their shots got sloppier the farther the target. Whoever their master had been known what they were teaching. Pelle, the gangly assassin, wasn't yet strong enough to manage a longbow, and barely made any shots. When he finished, his eye gleaming with resentment, the champion sniggered and Cain laughed the loudest. Rollo's face was grim. "Didn't anyone teach you how to use a bow, boy?" Pelle lifted his head, glaring at the weapons master with surprising brazenness. "I'm more skilled in poisons." "Poisons?" Brullo threw his hand up. "The king wants a champion, and you couldn't shoot a cow in a pasture?" The weapons master waved Pelle off. The other champions laughed again, and Selina wanted nothing more than to smile with them. But Pelor took a shuddering breath, his shoulders relaxing, and joined the other finished competitors. If he wound up being eliminated, where would they bring him? To prison? Or some other hellhole? Yes, we're reading the book to the end, Fox. Despite herself, Selina felt badly for the boy. His shots hadn't been that bad. I know. It was Knox, actually, who surprised her most, with 3 bullseyes into the nearer targets and the 2 final shots along the border of the inner ring. Perhaps she should consider him for an ally. From the way the other competitors watched him as he strode to the back of the room, she knew they were thinking of the same. Grave, the repulsive assassin, did fine, she supposed. 4 bullseyes and the final shot right on the border of the innermost ring. But then Cain stepped up to the white line painted at the back of the room, drew back his yew bow, his black ring glinting, and fired. Again and again and again, within the span of a few seconds. And when the second of his final shot stopped echoing in the suddenly silent chamber, Selina's stomach turned over. 5 bullseyes. Her one consolation was that none of them had been on the black dot. The absolute center, one had come close though. For some reason, the line started moving quickly. All she could think about was Cain. Cain getting applauded by Parrington. Cain getting clapped on the back by Brullo. Cain getting all of that praise and attention. Not because he was a mountain of muscle, but because he actually deserved it. Suddenly, Selina found herself standing at the white line, looking at the vast length of the room before her. Some of the men chuckled, albeit quietly, and she kept her head held high as she reached over her shoulder for an arrow, and knocked it into her bow. They'd done some archery practice a few days earlier, and she'd been excellent. Or, as excellent she could be without attracting attention. And she'd killed men from longer shots than the farthest target, clean shots too, actually, right through the throat. She tried to swallow, but her mouth was dry. I am Selina Sardothian, Alderland's assassin. If these men knew who I was, they'd stop laughing. I am Selina Sardothian. I am going to win. I will not be afraid. She pulled back her bow, the sore muscles in her arms aching with the effort. She shut out noise, shut out movement, shut out anything other than the sound of her breathing, as focus narrowed on the first target. She took a steady breath. As she exhaled, she let the arrow fly. Bullseye. The tightness in her stomach abated, and she sighed through her nose. It wasn't an absolute bullseye, but she hadn't been aiming for it anyway. Some men stopped laughing, but she paid them no heed as she knocked another arrow and fired at the second target. She aimed for the edge of the innermost ring, which she hit with deadly precision. She could have made an entire circle of arrows if she wanted, and if she had enough ammunition. She got another bullseye on the third target, aiming for the edge, but landing within the border. She did the same for the fourth target, but aimed for the opposite side of the bullseye. Where she aimed, the arrow met its mark. As she reached for her last arrow, she heard one of the competitors, a red-haired mercenary named Renaud, snigger. Oh, Renault. I better say that instead of the car name. She clenched her bow tightly enough for the wood to groan, and pulled back her final shot. The target was little more than a blur of color, so far back that its bullseye was a grain of sand in the vastness of the room. She couldn't see the little dot in the center, the dot that no one had yet to touch, even Cain. Selina's arm trembled with effort as she pulled the string back a bit farther and fired. The arrow hit the absolute center, obliterating the black dot. They stopped laughing. No one said anything to her when she stalked away from the line and tossed her bow back onto the cart. Cale only scowled at her. Obviously, she hadn't been that inconspicuous, but Dorian smiled. She sighed and joined the competitors waiting for the competition to finish, keeping well away from all of them. When their marks were compared by Brullo himself, one of the army soldiers, not young Pillar, wound up being eliminated. But though she hadn't lost by any means, Selina could not stand the feeling that she hadn't really won anything at all. Drink, guys. Despite her attempt to keep her breathing steady, Selina gasped for air as she ran beside Cale in the game park. If he was winded, he didn't show it. Other than the gleam of sweat on his face and the dampness of his white shirt. They ran toward a hill, its top still shrouded in the morning mist. Her legs buckled at the sight of the incline, and her stomach rose in her throat. Selina let out a loud gasp to get Kale's attention before she slowed to a stop and braced her hand against the tree trunk. She took a shuddering breath, holding on tightly to the tree as she vomited. She hated the warmth of the tears that leaked from her eyes, but couldn't wipe them away as she heaved again, gagging. Kale stood nearby, just watching. She leaned her brow into her rubber arm, calming her breathing, willing her body to ease. It had been 3 days since the first test, 10 since her arrival in Rifthold, and she was still horribly out of shape. The next elimination was in 4 days, and though training had resumed as usual, she had started waking up a little earlier than normal. She would not lose to Kane, or Renault, or any of them. Done? Kale asked. She lifted her head to give him a withering glare, but everything spun, dragging her down with it, and she retched again. I told you not to eat before we left. Are you done being smug? Are you done vomiting your guts up? For the time being, she snapped. Oh my god, this sounds like me and Ash. For the time being, she snapped. Perhaps I won't be so courteous next time, and I'll just vomit all over you instead. If you can catch me, he said with a half smile. Yes, tough love. Oh. She wanted to punch the smirk off his face, but as she took a step, her knees shook, and she put her hands against the tree again, waiting for the retching to renew. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw him looking at her back, most of which was exposed by her damp white undershirt. She stood. Are you enjoying looking at my scars? He sucked on his lower lip for a moment. When did you get those? She knew what he meant, the 3 enormous lines that ran down her back. When do you think? She said. He didn't reply, and she looked up at the canopy of leaves above them. A morning breeze sent them all shuddering, ripping a few from where they clung to the skeletal branches. Those 3, I received my first day in Endovier. What did you do to deserve them? Deserve them? She laughed sharply. No one deserved to be whipped like an animal. He opened his mouth, but she cut him off. I arrived in Endovier, and they dragged me into the center of the camp and tied me between the whipping posts. 21 lashes. She stared at him without entirely seeing him, as the ash-gray sky turned into the bleakness of Endovier, and the hiss of the wind became the sighing of slaves. That was before I had befriended any of the other slaves, and I spent that first night wondering if I would make it until morning, if my back would become infected, or if I would bleed out and die before I knew what was happening. No one helped you? Only in the morning. A young woman slipped me a tin of salve while we were waiting in line for breakfast. I never got to thank her. Later that day, 4 overseers raped and killed her. She clenched her hand into fist as her eyes stung. The day I snapped, I stopped I stopped by the section of the mines to repay them for what they did to her. Something frozen rushed through her veins. They died too quickly. But you were a woman in Endovier, Cale said, his voice rough and quiet. No one ever? He trailed off, unable to form the word. She gave him a slow, bitter smile. They were afraid of me, to begin with. And after the day I almost touched the wall, none of them dared to come too close to me. But if one guard tried to get too friendly, well, he'd become the example that reminded the others. I could easily snap again, if I felt like it. The wind stirred around them, ripping strands of hair from her braid. She didn't need to voice her other suspicion, that perhaps, somehow, Arabin had bribed the guards of Endovier for her safety. We each survived in our own way. Selina didn't quite understand the softness in the look he gave her as he nodded. She only stared at him for a moment longer before she burst into a run up toward the hill, where the first ray of sunshine began to peek through. The following afternoon, the champions stood gathered around Rollo, who lectured them on different weapons and other nonsense she'd learned years ago and didn't need to hear again. She was just contemplating whether she could sleep while standing up when, from the corner of her eye, a sudden movement by the balcony doors caught her attention. Selina turned just in time to see one of the larger champions, one of the discharged soldiers, shove a nearby guard, knocking him to the ground. The guard's head hit the marble with a crack, and he was instantly conscious. She didn't dare to move. None of the champions did, as the man hurtled toward the door, towards the garden, and escaped. But Cale and his men moved so fast that the fleeing champion didn't have time to touch the glass door before an arrow went clean through his throat. Silence fell, and half of the guards encircled the champions, hands on their swords, while the others, Cale included, rushed to the death champion and fallen guard. Bows groaned as the archers on the mezzanine pulled their strings taut. Selina kept still, as did Knox, who was standing close beside her. One wrong movement and a spook guard could kill her. Even Cain didn't breathe too deeply. Through the wall of champions, guards and their weapons, Selina beheld Cale kneeling by the unconscious guard. No one touched the fallen champion, who lay face down, his hand still outstretched toward the glass door. Sven had been his name, though she didn't know why he'd been expelled from the army. Gods above, Knox breathed so softly that his lips barely moved. They just killed him. She thought about telling him to shut up, but even snapping at him seemed risky. Some of the other champions were murmuring to each other, but no one dared to take a step. I knew they were serious about not letting us leave, but Knox swore, and she felt him glance sidelong at her. I was granted immunity by my sponsor. He tracked me down and said I wouldn't go to prison if I lost the competition. At that point she knew he was speaking more to himself, and when she didn't respond, Knox stopped talking. She stared and stared at the dead champion. What had made Sven risk it? And why here, right now? There were still 3 days until their second test. What made this moment so special? The day she snapped at Endovier, she hadn't been thinking about freedom. No, she picked the time and place and started swinging. She never meant to escape. The sunlight shone through the doors, illuminating the champion's splattered blood like stained glass. Maybe he realized he had no chance of winning, and that this kind of death was far better than returning to whatever place he'd come from. If he wanted to escape, he would have waited until dark, when he was away from everyone of the competition. Sven had wanted to prove a point. She understood, and understood only because of that day she had come within a fingertip of touching the wall of Endovier. Ardalan could take their freedom. It could destroy their lives, and beat and break and whip them. It couldn't force them into ridiculous contest. But, criminal or not, they were still human. Dying, rather than playing in the king's game, was the only choice left to him. Still staring at his outstretched hand, forever pointing towards an unreachable horizon, Selina said a silent prayer for the dead champion and wished him well. Chapter 17. With heavy eyelids, Dorian Haviliard tried not to slouch as he sat upon his throne. Music and chatter fluttered through the air, wooing him to sleep. Why must his mother insist on his attending court? Even the weekly afternoon visit was too much. But it was better than studying The Corpse of the Eye-Eater, which Kale has spent the past few days investigating. He'd worry about that later. If it became an issue, which it wouldn't, if Kale was looking into it, it had probably just been a drunken brawl. And then there was the champion who tried to escape this afternoon. Dorian shuddered at the thought of what must have been like to witness it, and at the mess Kale had to deal with. From the injured soldier to the sponsor who lost his champion to the dead man himself. What had his father been thinking when he decided to host this contest? Dorian glanced at his mother, seated on a throne beside his own. She certainly didn't know anything about it, and probably would have been horrified if she knew what kind of criminals were living under her roof. His mother was still beautiful, though her face was a bit wrinkled and cracked with powder, and her auburn hair had a few silver streaks. Today she was swathed in yard of forest green velvet, and floating scarves and shawls of gold, and her crown upheld a sparkling veil that gave Dorian the distinct impression that she was wearing a tent upon her head. Before them, the nobility strutted across the floor of the court, gossiping, scheming, seducing. An orchestra played minuets in a corner, and servants slipped through the gathered nobles in a dance of their own as they refilled and cleared plates and cups of silverware. Dorian felt like an ornament. Of course he was wearing an outfit of his mother's choosing, sent to him this morning, a vest of dark bluish-green velvet, with almost ridiculous billowy white sleeves bursting, from the blue and white striped shoulders. The pants, mercifully, were light gray, though his chestnut suede boots looked too new for masculine pride. "Dorian, my dear, you're sulking." He gave Queen Georgina an apologetic grin. "I received a letter from Holland. He sends his love." "Did he say any of interest?" "Only that he loathes school and wishes to come home." "He says that in every letter." The Queen of Ireland sighed. "If your father didn't prevent me, I'd have him home. He's better off at school. When it come to Holland, the farther away he was, the better." Georgina surveyed her son. "You were better behaved. You never disobeyed your tutors. Oh, my poor Holland! When I'm dead, you'll care for him, won't you?" "Dead? Mother, you're only—" "I know how old I am." She waved a ring-encrusted hand. "Which is why you must marry, and soon." "Marry?" Dorian ground his teeth. "Marry whom?" "Dorian, you're the crown prince, and already 19 at that. Do you wish to become king and die without an heir, so Holland can take the throne?" He didn't answer. "I thought so." After a moment she said, "There are plenty of young women who might make a good wife, though a princess would be preferred." "There are no princesses left," he said a bit sharply. "Except for the Princess Nehemia." She laughed and put a hand on his. "Oh, don't worry. I wouldn't force you to marry her. I'm surprised your father allows for her to still bear the title. The impetuous, haughty girl. Do you know she refused to wear the dress I sent her?" "I'm sure the princess has her reasons," Dorian said wearily, disgusted by his mother's unspoken prejudice. "I've only spoken to her once, but she seemed lively." "Then perhaps you shall marry her." Her mother laughed again before he could respond. Dorian smiled weakly. He still couldn't figure out why his father had granted the King of Elway's request that his daughter visit their court to become better acquainted with the ways of Ardalan. As far as ambassadors went, Nehemia wasn't exactly the best choice. Not when he heard rumors of her support of the Elway rebels, and her efforts to shut down the labor camp at Kalakula. Dorian couldn't blame her for that, though, not after he'd seen the horror that was Endovier, and the destruction it had wrought upon Selina Sadothian's body. But his father never did anything without a reason, and from the few words he'd exchanged with Nehemia, he couldn't help but wonder if she had her own motivations in coming here too. "Oh, welcome back, Wolfie. It's a pity that Lady Caltaine has an agreement with Duke Parrington," his mother went on. "She's such a beautiful girl, and so polite. Perhaps she has a sister." Dorian crossed his arms, swallowing his repulsion. Caltaine stood at the far end of the court, and he was all too aware of her eyes creeping over every inch of him. He shifted in his seat, his tailbone aching from sitting for so long. "What about Elise?" the Queen said, indicating a blonde young woman clad in lavender. "She's very beautiful and can be quite playful." "As I've already learned." "Elise bored me," he said. Oh, Dorian, she put a hand over her heart. You are not about to inform me that you wish to marry for love, are you? Love does not guarantee a successful marriage. He was bored. Bored of these women. Bored of these cavaliers who masqueraded as companions. Bored of everything. He'd hoped his journey to Endovier would quell that boredom, and that he'd be glad to return home. But he found home to be the same. The same ladies still looked at him with pleading eyes. The same serving girls still winked at him. The same councilman still slipped pieces of potential legislation under his door with hopeful notes. And his father would always be preoccupied with conquest, and wouldn't stop until every continent bore Ardalan's flag. Even gambling over the so-called champions had become achingly dull. It was clear Kane and Selina would ultimately face each other, and until then, well, the other champions weren't worth his time. You're sulking again. Are you upset over something, my pet? Have you heard from Rosamond? My poor child, how she broke your heart. The Queen shook her head, though it was over a year ago. He didn't reply. He didn't want to think about Rosamond, or about the boorish husband she'd left him for. Some nobles started dancing, weaving in and out among each other. Many were his age, but he somehow felt as if there existed a vast distance between them. He didn't feel older, nor did he feel any wiser, but he rather felt. He felt as if there was something inside him that didn't fit in with their merriment, with their willing ignorance of the world outside the castle. It went beyond his title. He had enjoyed their company early in his adolescence, but it had become apparent that he'd always be a step away. The worst of it was that they didn't seem to notice he was different, or that he felt different. Were it not for Chaol, he would have felt immensely lonely. "Well," his mother said, snapping her ivory fingers at one of her ladies-in-waiting, "I'm sure your father has you busy, but when you find a moment to bother thinking of me, and the fate of your kingdom, look through this." His mother's lady curtsied as she extended to him a folded piece of paper, stamped with his mother's blood-red seal. Dorian ripped it open, and his stomach twisted at the long lines of names. All ladies of noble blood, all of marriageable age. "What is this?" he demanded, fighting the urge to rip up the paper. She gave him a winning smile. "A list of potential brides. Any one of them would be suitable to take the crown, and all, I've been told, are quite capable of producing heirs." Dorian stuffed the list of names into the pocket of his vest. The restlessness within him would not cease. "I'll think about it," he said, and before she could reply, he stepped from the awning-covered podium. Immediately 5 young women flocked to him and began asking him to dance. How he fared, if he would attend the Samhain ball. Around and around their words circled, and Dorian stared at them blankly. What were their names? He peered over their jewel-encrusted heads to find the path to the door. He'd suffocate if he remained here for too long. With only polite goodbyes, the Crown Prince strolled from the jingle and jangle of the court, the list of would-be brides burning a hole through his clothes and straight into his skin. Dorian put his hands in his pocket as he strode down the halls of the castle. The kennels were empty, the dogs were at the track. He wished to inspect one of the pregnant hounds, though he knew it was impossible to predict the outcome of the litter until she gave birth. He hoped the pups would be pure, but their mother had a tendency to escape from her pen. She was his fastest, but he'd never been able to quell the wildness within her. He didn't really know where he was going now. He just needed to walk anywhere. Dorian loosened the top button of his vest. The clash of swords echoed from an open doorway, and he paused. He faced the champion's training room, and even though training was supposed to be over by now, there she was. Her golden hair shone as she wove in and out of a knot of 3 guards. Her sword little more than a steel extension of her hand. She didn't bark at the guards as she dodged and twirled around them. Someone began clapping to the left, and the 4 dueling figures stopped, panting. Dorian watched a grin spread across the assassin's face as she beheld the source. The sheen of sweat illuminated her high cheekbones, and her blue eyes sparkled. Yes, she was truly lovely. But Princess Nehemia approached, clapping. She was clad not in her usual white gown, but rather in a dark tunic and loose trousers, and she clutched an ornate carved wooden staff in one hand. The princess clasped the assassin on the shoulder and said something to the girl that made her laugh. Dorian looked around. Where was Cale or Bollo? Why was Ardalan's assassin here with the Princess of Elway? And with a sword? This could not go on, especially after that champion's attempted escape the other day. Dorian approached and smiled at the princess as she bowed. Nehemia only deigned to give him a tear's nod. Not surprising. Dorian took Selina's hand. It smelled of metal and sweat, but he kissed it anyways, raising his eyes to her face as he did so. "Lady Lillian," he muttered onto her skin. "Your Highness," she said, trying to pull her hand from his, but Dorian held fast to her callous palm. "Might I have a word?" he said, leading her away before she could agree. When they were out of hearing distance, he demanded, "Where's Cale?" She crossed her arms. "Is this any way to speak to your beloved champion?" He frowned. "Where is he?" "I don't know. If I were to bet, though, I'd wager he's inspecting the Eye-Eater's mangled body, or disposing of Sven's body. Besides, Rollo said I could stay here as long as I liked after we were done. I do have another test tomorrow, you know." Of course he knew. "Why is Princess Nehemia here?" "She called on me, and when Philippa told her I was here, she insisted on joining. Apparently a woman can only go so long without a sword between her hands." She bit her lip. "I don't recall you being so talkative." "Well, Perhaps if you'd taken the time to speak with me, you would have found me to be so. He snorted, but took the bait. God damn him. And when would have I spoken to you? You do recall the little fact that we traveled together from Endovia, don't you? And that I've been here for weeks now? I sent you these books, he offered. And did you ever ask me if I read them? Had she forgotten to whom she was speaking? I've spoken to you once since we've been here. She shrugged and made to turn away. Irritated but slightly curious, he grabbed her arm. Her turquoise eyes glittered as she stared at his hand, and his heart quickened when her gaze rose to her face. Yes, sweaty as she was beautiful. Aren't you afraid of me? She glanced at his sword belt. Or are you as deft at handling your sword as Captain Westfall? He stepped closer, tightening his grip. Better, he whispered in her ear. There, she was blushing and blinking. Well, she began, but the timing was off. He'd won. She crossed her arm. Very amusing, Your Highness. He bowed dramatically. I do what I can, but you can't have Princess Nehemia here with you. And why is that? Do you believe I'm going to kill her? Why would I kill the one person in this castle who isn't a babbling idiot? She gave him a look that suggested he was part of that majority. Not to mention her guards would kill me before I even lifted a hand. It simply can't happen. She's here to learn our customs, not to spar. She's a princess. She can do what she likes. And I suppose you're going to teach her about weaponry? She cocked her head. Perhaps you're just a little bit afraid of me? I'll escort her back to her chambers. She gestured wildly for him to pass. We'd help you. He ran a hand through his black hair and approached the princess, who waited for them, with a hand on her hip. Your Highness, Dorian said, motioning her personal guard to join them. I am afraid we must return to your chambers. The princess looked behind his shoulder with a raised eyebrow. To his dismay, Selina began speaking in Elway to the princess, who stomped her staff. She hissed something at him. Dorian's skill with the Elway language was spotty at best, and the princess spoke too fast for him to understand. Thankfully, the assassin translated. She says you can return to your cushions and dancing and leave us be, Selina said. He tried his best to look serious. Tell her it's unacceptable for her to spar. Selina said something, to which the princess only waved a hand and strode past them onto the sparring floor. What did you say? Dorian asked. I said you volunteered to be her first partner, she said. Well, you don't want to upset the princess. I will not spar with the princess. Would you rather spar with me? Selina said. Perhaps if we had a private lesson in your chambers, he said smoothly, tonight. I'll be waiting. She curled her hair around a finger. The princess twirled her staff with strength and precision that made him gulp. Deciding that he didn't feel like having the daylight walloped out of him, he walked to the rack of weapons and selected 2 wooden swords. "How about some basic swordplay instead?" he asked Nehemia. To his relief, the princess nodded and handed her staff to one of her guards, then took the practice sword Dorian extended to her. Selina would not make a fool out of him. "You stand like this," he said to the princess, taking a defensive stance. Alright guys, chapter 18. Selina smiled as she watched the Crown Prince of Ardalan lead the Princess of Aelway through the basic step of fencing. He was charming, she supposed, in an arrogant sort of way. But someone with his title could have been far, far worse. It made her uneasy how he made her blush. In fact, he was so attractive that she had difficulty not thinking about attractive he was, and again wondering why he wasn't married. She sort of wanted to kiss him. She swallowed. She'd been kissed before, of course, by Sam, and often enough that she was no stranger to it. But it'd been over a year since she lost the assassin she'd grown up with, and even though the thought of kissing anyone else had made her sick, when she saw Dorian, Princess Nehemia lunged, slapping Dorian on the wrist with her sword. Selina bit down her laughter. He grimaced and rubbed the sore joint, but then smiled at the princess, began gloating. Damn him for being so handsome. Selina leaned against the wall and would have enjoyed the lesson had someone not grabbed her arm hard enough to hurt. "What is this?" Dragged from the wall, she found herself facing Cale. "What is what?" "What is Dorian doing with her?" She shrugged. "Sparring?" "And why are they sparring?" "Because he volunteered to teach her how to fight." Cale practically shoved her from him as he approached the pair. They stopped, and Dorian followed Cale to a corner. They spoke quickly, angrily, before Cale came back to Selina. "The guards will take you to your chambers." "What?" She remembered their conversation on the balcony and frowned. So much for swapping stories. "The test is tomorrow, and I need to train." "I think you have enough training for today. It's almost dinner. Your lesson with Brullo ended 2 hours ago. Get some rest, or you'll be useless tomorrow. And no, I don't know what the test will be, so don't bother asking." "That's absurd!" she cried, and a pinch from Cale kept her voice down. Princess Nehemia cast a worried glance in Selina's direction, but the assassin waved at her to resume her lesson with the Crown Prince. "I'm not going to do anything, you insufferable moron." "Are you honestly so blind that you can't see why we can't allow this?" "Can't allow? Are you just afraid of me?" "Don't flatter yourself," Cale said. "You think I want to go back to Endovier?" she hissed. "You think I'm not aware of the fact that if I flee, I'll be hunted down for the rest of my life? You think I don't know why I vomit when you and I run in the morning? My body is a wreck. I need to spend these extra hours here, and you shouldn't punish me for it. I'm not going to pretend to know how a criminal mind works. She threw her hands in the air. You know, I actually felt guilty, just a little guilty, and now I remember why I shouldn't have. I hate sitting around, locked in my room, bored out of my senses. I hate all these guards and nonsense. I hate you telling me to hold back when Frollo sings Cain's praises and I'm just here, boring and unnoticed in the middle. I hate being told what I can't do, and I hate you most of all. He tapped his foot on the ground. Are you finished? Oh, she is throwing a tantrum now. There were no kindness in Kale's face, and she clicked her tongue as she laughed, her fist aching to bash his teeth down his throat. My, my, my. Alright, guys, we've reached chapter 19. Time to take a break. So we can read further to next Monday. Yes, I just took a drink, sweetie. Oh, what? Yes, wine time. Wait, are you guys telling me you want to hear more of the book? Yeah. If it wasn't this early in the day, I would have been. What, you want more reading? You want more reading? Jesus, guys. Okay, I guess we can take a few more chapters then. Sitting in the chair near the hearth of the great hall, Caltaine watched Duke Parrington converse with Queen Georgina atop her dais. It'd been a shame that Dorian had left so quickly an hour ago. She hadn't even had the chance to speak to him, which was especially irksome given that she spent the better part of the morning dressing for court. Her raven black hair was neatly coiled around her head, and her skin glowed golden from the subtle shimmering powders she dusted on her face. Though the bindings on her pink and yellow gown crushed her ribs, and the pearls and diamonds around her neck strangled her, she kept her chin high, poised. Dorian had left, but having Parrington show up was an unexpected surprise. The Duke rarely visited court. This had to be important. High five, huh? Beltane rose from her chair by the fire as the Duke bowed to the Queen and strode toward the doors. As she stepped into his path, he paused at the sight of her, his eyes gleaming with a hunger that made her want to cringe. He bowed low. "Milady." "Your Grace," she smiled, forcing all that repulsion down deep, deep, deep. "I hope you're well," he said, offering his arm to lead her out of the hall. She smiled again, taking it, though he was somewhat rotund. Hard muscle lay in the arm beneath her hand. "Very well, thank you. And yourself? I feel I haven't seen you in days and days. What a wonderful surprise to have you visit the court." Parrington gave her a yellow smile. "I missed you as well, milady." She tried not to wince as his hairy, meaty fingers rubbed her pristine skin, and instead delicately inclined her head toward him. "I hope Her Majesty was in good health. Was your conversation a pleasant one?" Oh, it was so dangerous to pry, especially when she was here on his good graces. Meeting him last spring had been a stroke of luck, and convincing him to invite her to court, mostly by implying what might await him once she was out of her father's household and without a chaperone, hadn't been that difficult. But she wasn't here to simply enjoy the pleasures of the court. No, she was tired of being a minor lady, waiting to be married off to the highest bidder, tired of petty politics and easily manipulated fools. "Her Majesty is quite well, actually," Parrington said, leading Beltane toward her rooms. Her stomach clenched a bit, though he didn't hide that he wanted her. He hadn't pushed her into bed yet. But with a man like Parrington, who always got what he wanted, she didn't have much time to find a way to avoid owning up to the subtle promise she made him earlier that year. "But," the Duke went on, "with the son of a marriageable age, she is busy." Beltane kept her face plain, calm, serene. "Can we expect any news of an engagement in the near future?" Another dangerous question. "I certainly hope so," the Duke grumbled, his face darkening beneath his ruddy hair. The jagged scar along his cheek stood out starkly. Her Majesty already had a list of girls deemed appropriate. The Duke halted, remembering whom he spoke to, and Beltane battered her eyelashes at him. "Oh, I'm quite sorry," she purred. "I didn't mean to pry into the royal household's affairs." She patted his arm, her heart kicking into full gallop. Dorian had been giving a list of appropriate brides? Who was on it? She had to find out who stood between her and the crown. "It's nothing to apologize for," he said, his dark eyes shining. "Come, tell me what you've been doing these past few days." "Not much of note, though I met a very interesting young woman," she said casually, leading him down a window-limited stairway into a glass section of the castle. "A friend of Dorian's, Lady Lillian, he called her." The Duke went positively rigid. "You met her?" "Oh, yes, she's quite kind." The lie rolled off of her tongue. "When I spoke to her today, she mentioned how much the Crown Prince likes her. I hope for her sake she was on the Queen's list." While she wanted some information about Lillian, she hadn't expected this. The Lady Lillian? Of course she isn't. Oh, the poor thing. I suspect her heart will be broken. I know it's not my place to pry, she went on, the Duke growing redder and more furious by the moment. But I heard it not an hour ago from Dorian himself that— That what? A thrill went through her at his anger. Not anger at her, but at Lillian. At the weapon she just had the good fortune to stumble across. That he very attached to her, possibly in love with her. That's absurd. It's true. She gave a morose shake of her head. How tragic. Foolish is what it is. The Duke stopped at the end of the hallway that led to Caltain's room. His anger loosened his tongue. Foolish and daft and impossible. Impossible? Some day I will explain why. A clock chimed, off kilter, and Parrington turned in its direction. I have a council meeting. He leaned close enough to whisper in her ear, his hot breath and damp against her skin. Perhaps I see you later tonight. He dragged a hand down her side before he walked away. She watched him go, and when he disappeared she let out a shuddering sigh. But if he could get her close to Dorian— She had to find out who her competition was. But first she had to find a way to get Lillian's claws out of the prince. List or no list, she was a threat. And if the Duke hated her as much as it seemed, she might have powerful allies when the times came to make sure Lillian released her hold on Dorian. Uh-oh. The intrigues are here. Dorian and Cale didn't say much as they walked to dinner in the great hall. Princess Nehemia was safely in her chambers, surrounded by her guards. It'd been quickly agreed that while it was foolish of Selina to spar with the princess, Cale's absence was inexcusable, even with the dead champion to investigate. You seemed rather friendly with Sir Dothian, Cale said, his voice cold. Jealous, are we? Dorian teased. I'm more concerned for your safety. She might be pretty and might impress you with her cleverness, but she is still an assassin, Dorian. You sound like my father. It's common sense. Stay away from her. Champion or no champion. Don't give me orders. I'm only doing it for your safety. Why would she kill me? I think she likes being pampered. If she hasn't attempted to escape or kill anyone, then why would she do it now? He patted his friend on the shoulder. You worry too much. It's my occupation to worry. Then you'll have grey hair before you're 25. And Sir Dothian certainly will not fall in love with you. What nonsense are you talking? Well, if she does try to escape, which she won't, then she'll break your heart. You'll be forced to throw her in the dungeons, hunt her down, or kill her. Dorian, I don't like her. Yeah, right, guys. Isn't men what they are saying all the time if they do not like a girl? Sensing his friend's growing irritation, Dorian changed the subject. What about that dead champion, the Eye Eater? Any idea yet who did it or why? Cale's eyes darkened. I've studied it again and again over the past few days. The body was totally destroyed. The color bleached from Kale's cheeks. Innards scooped out and gone. Even the brain was missing. I've sent a message to your father about it, but I'll continue investigating in the meantime. I bet it was just a drunken brawl, Dorian said, though he had been in plenty brawls himself and had never known anyone to get about removing someone's innards. A trickle of fear formed in the back of Dorian's mind. Zombies? Battle! Oh, posture check. All right. Straighten my back. A trickle of fear formed in the back of Dorian's mind. My father would probably be glad to have the eye-eater dead and gone. I hope so. Dorian grinned and put an arm around the captain's shoulders. With you looking into it, I'm sure it'll be solved tomorrow, he said, leading his friend into the dining hall. Yeah, hello, sweetie. How are you? Yeah. It seems like my health is on everyone's mind at the moment. Selina closed her book and sighed. What a terrible ending. She stood from her chair, unsure where she was going, and walked out of her bedroom. She'd been willing to apologize to Cale when he found her sparring with Nehemia that afternoon, but his behavior... She paced through her rooms. He had more important things to do than guard the world's most famous criminal, didn't he? She didn't enjoy being cruel, but hadn't he deserved it? She'd really make a fool out of herself by mentioning the vomiting, and she'd call him all sorts of nasty things. Did he trust her or hate her? Selina looked at her hands and realized that she had wrung them so badly that her fingers were red. How had she gone from the most feared prisoner in Endovier to this sappy mess? She had greater matters to worry about, like the test tomorrow, and this dead champion. She already altered the hinges on all her doors so that they squealed loudly any time they opened. If someone entered her room, she'd know well in advance. Just don't die and we'll be fine hearing these fancy books. Still cheaper than those listening books things you can subscribe to. hmm Yeah. And she managed to embed some stolen sewing needles into a bar of soap for a makeshift miniature pike. It was better than nothing, especially if this murderer had a taste for champion blood. She forced her hands to her side, shaking her unease, and strode into the music and gaming room. She could not play billiards or cards by herself, but Selina eyed the pianoforte. She used to play. Oh, she loved to play, loved music, the way music could break and heal and make everything seem possible and heroic. Carefully, as if approaching a sleeping person, Selina walked to the large instrument. She pulled out the wooden bench, wincing at the loud scraping sound it made. Folding back the heavy lid, she pushed her feet on the pedals, testing them. She eyed the smooth ivory keys and then the black keys, which were like the gaps between teeth. She had been good once, perhaps better than good. Arabin Hamel made her play for him whenever they saw each other. She wondered if Arabin knew she was out of the mines. Would he try to free her? If he did. She still didn't dare to face the possibility of who might have betrayed her. Oh, and on top of that, it's done in a sexy, sexy voice. No, 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 no. No sexy voice here. Things had been such a haze when she'd been captured. In 2 weeks she lost Sam and her own freedom, and lost something of herself in those blurry days too. Sam. What would he make of all of this? If he'd been alive when she was captured, he would have had her out of the royal dungeons before the king even got word of her imprisonment. But Sam, like her, had been betrayed, and sometimes the absence of him hit her so hard that she forgot how to breathe. She touched a lower note. It was deep and throbbing, full of sorrow and anger. Gingerly, with one hand, she tapped out a simple, slow melody on the higher keys. Echoes, shred of memories arising out of the void of her mind. Her room was so silent that the music seemed obtrusive. But Mommy's voice is sexy. No. No, 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 no. Don't make me blush, guys. She moved her right hand, playing upon the flats and sharps. It was a piece that she used to play again and again, until Arabin would yell at her to play something else. She played a chord, and then another, added in a few silver notes from her right hand, pushed once on a pedal, and was gone. The notes burst from her fingers, staggering at first, but then more confident as the emotion in the music took over. It was a mournful piece, but it made her into something clean and new. She was surprised that her hands had not forgotten. That somewhere in her mind, after a year of darkness and slavery, music was still alive and breathing. That somewhere between the notes was Sam. She forgot about the time as she drifted between pieces, voicing the unspeakable, opening old wounds, playing and playing, as the sound forgave and saved her. No commands for that, Missy. Leaning against the doorway, Dorian stood, utterly transfixed. She'd been playing for him. Oh, sorry. She'd been playing for some time with her back to him. He wondered when she'd notice him, or if she'd ever stop at all. He wouldn't mind listening forever. Get I get a recorded version of this I can listen to before bedtime? Oh, come on, guys. My voice is so dull. Come on. Yes, the stream is recorded. Actually, Ginger, please remind me to upload to YouTube. Now they are not being recorded at the same time. Sexy and soft. No, 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 no. He wouldn't mind listening forever. He had come here with the intention of embarrassing a snide assassin, and had instead found a young woman pouring her secrets into a pianoforte. Battle, go away! For Pete's sake! Dorian peeled himself from the wall. For all her assassinating experience, she didn't notice him until he sat down on the bench beside her. You play Her fingers slipped on the keys, which let out a loud, awful clank. And she was halfway to the rack of cue sticks when she beheld him. Her fingers... No, he could have sworn her eyes were damp. What are you doing here? She glanced to the door. Was she planning on using one of those cue sticks against him? Cale isn't with me, he said with a quick smile, if that's what you're wondering. I apologize if I interrupted. He wondered at her discomfort as she turned red. It seemed far too human an emotion for Ardalan's assassin. Perhaps his earlier plan to embarrass her wasn't foiled yet. But you were playing so beautifully that It's fine. She walked toward one of the chairs. He stood, blocking her path. She was of surprisingly average height. He glanced down at her form. Average height aside, her curves were enticing. What are you doing here? She repeated. He smiled roguishly. We decided to meet tonight, don't you remember? I thought it was a joke. Okay, I'm not even gonna read out loud, okay? Dreadnought? Shush. I'm Crown Prince of Ardalan. He sank into a chair before the fire. I never joke. Okay, I will be drinking. Fuck's sake. Are you allowed to be here? Allowed? Again, I'm a prince. I can do what I like. Yes, but I'm Ardalan's assassin. He wouldn't be intimidated even if she could grab that billiards cue and skewer him with it in a matter of seconds. From your playing, it seems that you're a great deal more than that. What do you mean? Well, he said, trying not to get lost in her strange, lovely eyes, I don't think anyone who plays like that can be just a criminal. It seems like you have a soul, he teased. Of course I have a soul. Everyone has a soul. She was still red. He made her that uncomfortable? He fought his grin. This was too much fun. How did you like the books? They were very nice, she said quietly. They were wonderful, actually. I'm glad. Their eyes met, and she retreated behind the back of the chair. If he didn't know better, he would have thought himself to him. Oh, no, try that again. If he didn't know better, he would have thought himself to be the assassin. How's training going? Any competitors giving you trouble? Excellently, she said, but the corners of her mouth drifted downwards. And no, after today, I don't think any of us will be giving anyone any trouble. It took him a moment to realize she was thinking of the competitor who had been killed while trying to escape. She chewed on her bottom lip, quiet for a heartbeat, before she asked, Did, did Kale give the order to kill Sven? No, he said. My father commanded all the guards to shoot to kill if any of you tried to escape. I don't think Kale would ever have given that order, he added, though he wasn't sure why. But the unnerving stillness in her eyes abated at last. When she didn't say more, Dorian asked as casually as he could, On that note, how are you and Kale getting along? Of course, it was a totally innocent question. Yeah, right. She shrugged, and he tried not to read too far into the gesture. Fine. I think he hates me a bit, but given his position, I'm not surprised. Why do you think he hates you? For some reason, he couldn't bring himself to deny it. Because I'm an assassin, and he's a captain of the guard, forced to belittle himself by minding the would-be king's champion. Do you wish it were otherwise? He gave her a lazy grin. That question wasn't so innocent. She inched around the chair, coming closer to him, and his heart jumped a beat. Well, who wants to be hated? Though I'd rather be hated than invisible. But it makes no difference. She wasn't convincing. You're lonely. He said it before he could stop himself. Lonely? She shook her head and finally, after all that coaxing, sat down. He fought against the urge to reach across the space between them, to see if her hair was as silky as it looked. No, I can survive well enough on my own, if given proper reading material. He looked at the fire, trying not to think about where she'd been only weeks before, and what that kind of loneliness might have felt like. There were no books in Endovier. Still, it can't be pleasant to be one's own companion at all times. And what would you do? She laughed. I'd rather not be seen as one of your lovers. And what's wrong with that? Dorian said. I'm already notorious as an assassin. I don't particularly feel like being notorious for sharing your bed. He choked, but she went on. Would you like me to explain why? Or is it enough for me to say that I don't take jewels and trinkets as payment for my attention? For my affection. He snarled. I'm not going to debate morality with an assassin. You kill people for money, you know. Her eyes became hard as she pointed to the door. You may leave. Now. You're dismissing me? He didn't know whether to laugh or yell. Shall I summon Kale to see what he thinks? She crossed her arms, knowing she had won. Hey, Yorn! How are you today, sweetie? Thank you for stopping by. Oh, I'm doing great. I'm doing great, thank you. Oh, you're doing very well? Oh, that's good, that's good. Don't let me stop your reading? No, it's okay, sweetie. Yeah, I'm drinking, I'm drinking. I'm taking a drink. Thank you so much, sweetie. I have a very great family in my unicorns. It's two of my unicorns that have been at work. It is Wolfie and it's Battle. Thank you guys. I love you so much for this. Yeah, yeah, no worries, sweetie. Now, where were we? You're dismissing me? You didn't know whether to laugh or yell. Shall I summon Kale to see what he thinks? She crossed her arms, knowing she had won. Perhaps she'd also realized that there was fun to be had in riling him, too. Why should I be thrown from your rooms for stating the truth? The webcam is there, can't you see? Yes, you can see the webcam is there, guys. And I am there. This is my character. So you see, Julie, you wanted webcam and I'm there. Hey, Simon, sweetie. Yes, because if there's actual webcam here, guys, you will flee the fuck out of here. What? I'm not cheeky. Guys, please tell Julie I'm not cheeky. No, I'm not. Oh, so you could only give me 2 minutes, huh? Wolfie? Oh my god. Battle, you do not do that. Battle should not do anything. Don't you dare. Now where were we? We're trying to read here, guys. Why should I be thrown from your room from stating the truth? You just call me your little. No, you just call me little more than a whoremonger. He hadn't had this much fun in ages. Tell me about your life. How you learned to play the pianoforte so masterfully. Guys, stop it. And what was that piece? It was so sad. Were you thinking about a secret lover? He winked. I practiced. She stood, walking toward the door. And yes, she snapped, I was. Alright, guys, cool it with that. You're quite prickly tonight, he said, trailing her. He stopped a foot away, but the space between them felt strangely intimate, especially as he purred. You're not nearly as chatty as you were this afternoon. I'm not some odd commodity that you can gawk at. She stepped closer. I am not some carnival exhibit, and you won't use me as part of some unfulfilled desire for adventure and excitement. Which is undoubtedly why you've chosen me to be your champion. His mouth fell open and he conceded a step. What? Was all he managed. She stalked past him and dropped into the armchair. Oh, give me a sec, phone call. Sorry about that, guys. Wow, even phone calls are in books quite realistic. Yes, Dexter's uh, Dexter's theme is quite fitting for the book we are reading, actually. Uh, Welcome to the stream, guys. For you that just arrived, we are reading Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. Um, it's quite interesting. Uh, so, where were we, guys? I actually forgot where we were. Oh, here. Um, thank you, thank you. She stalked past him and dropped into the armchair. At least she wasn't leaving. Did you honestly think I wouldn't realize why you came here tonight? As someone who gave me the crown of a hero to read, which suggested a rather fanciful mind that yearns for adventure. I don't think you're an adventurer, he muttered. Oh? The castle offers so much excitement that the presence of Orland's assassin is nothing unusual. Nothing that would entice a young prince who's been confined to a court all his life. And what does this competition suggest, for that matter? I'm already at your father's disposal. I won't become his son's jester too. It was his turn to blush. Had he ever been scolded by anyone like this? His parents and tutors perhaps, but certainly not a young woman. Don't you know who you're talking to? My dear prince, she drawled, examined her nails. You're alone in my rooms. The hallway door is far away, and I can say whatever I wish. He burst out laughing. She sat up and watched him, her head tilted to her side. Her cheeks were flushed, making her blue eyes even brighter. Did she know what he might have wanted to do with her if she wasn't an assassin? I'll go, he said at last, stopping himself from wondering if he could actually risk it. Risk his father's and Kael's wrath, and what might happen if he decided to damn the consequences. But I'll return soon. I'm sure, she said dryly. Good night, Sardathian. He looked around her rooms and grinned. Tell me something before I leave. This mystery lover of yours? He doesn't live in the castle, does he? He instantly knew. He said the wrong thing when some of the light vanished from her eyes. Good night, she said, a bit coldly. Dorian shook his head. I didn't mean to. She just waved him off, looking toward the fire. Understanding his dismissal, he strode to the door, each of his footsteps sounding in now too silent room. He was almost to the threshold when she spoke, to her voice. Oh, wait, he was almost to the threshold when she spoke, her voice distant. His name was Sam. She was still staring at the fire. Was Sam? What happened? She looked at him, smiling sadly. He died. When? He got out. He would never tease her like that. Never said a damn word if he'd known. Her words were strangled, and she said, 13 months ago. A glimmer of pain flashed across her face, so real and endless that he felt it in his gut. "I'm sorry," he breathed. She shrugged, as if it could somehow diminish the grief he still saw in her eyes, shining so bright in the firelight. "So am I," she whispered, and faced the fire again. Sensing she was truly done talking this time, Dorian cleared his throat. "Good luck at the test tomorrow." She didn't say anything as he left the room. He couldn't banish her heart-wrenching music from his mind, even when he burned his mother's list of eligible maidens, even when he read a book long into the night, even when he finally fell asleep. I think he's falling more and more in love with her. It's not good. Chapter 21. Oh, before I continue, guys. Yeah, like no one saw that coming. Aren't you tired of my voice yet? I've been reading for 2.5 hours now. Nope. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Chapter 21. You want more? All right. Oi! Just took a drink. Straighten my back. Selina dangled from the stone wall of the castle, her legs trembling as she dug her tar-covered fingers and toes into the cracks between the giant blocks. Anyway, I'm going to head off and record this stuff so I can continue this later. Cheers and have fun all. Thank you for stopping by, sweetie. Thank you. You have a good day. 40K already. Oh my god, you're close, Ginger. No! Bruno shouted something at the other 19 remaining champions, scaling the castle walls. But from 17 feet up, the wind carried his words away. Mm-hmm. One of the champions hadn't shown up for the test, and even his guards hadn't known where he went. Maybe he'd actually managed to escape. Risking it seemed better than this miserably stupid test. She gritted her teeth, inching her hand upward, and pulled herself up another foot. 20 feet up, and about 30 feet away, flapped the object of this insane race, a golden flag. The test was simple. Climb the castle to where the flag waved 90 feet in the air and retrieve it. First one who grabbed the flag and brought it back down received a pat on the back. last one to reach the designated spot would be sent back to whatever gutter they came from. Surprisingly, no one had fallen yet, perhaps because the path to the flag was fairly easy. Balconies, window sills, and trellis covered most of the space. Selina scooted up another few feet, her fingers aching. Looking down was always a bad idea, even if Arabin had forced her to stand on the ledge of his assassin's keep for hours on end to become accustomed to heights. She panted as she grasped another window ledge and hoisted herself up. It was deep enough that she could crouch within, and she took a moment to study the other competitors. Sure enough, Kane was in the lead, and had taken the easiest path toward the flag, Grave and Varin in his trail, Knox close behind, and Pelor, the young assassin, not far below him. There were so many competitors following him that their gear often got tangled together. They had each been given the opportunity to select one object to aid them in their ascent: rope, spikes, special boots, and sure enough, Kane had gone right for the rope. She'd taken a small tin of tar, and as Selina rose from her crouch in the window-sill, her sticky black hands and bare feet easily gripped the stone wall. She'd used some rope to strap the tin to her belt, and before she stepped out of the shade of the sill, she rubbed a little more on her palms. Someone gasped below, and she swallowed the urge to glance down. She knew she'd taken a more difficult path, but it was better than fighting off all the competitors taking the easy route. She wouldn't put it past Grave or Varin to shove her off the wall. Her hands suctioned onto the stone, and Selina heaved herself upward just in time to hear a shriek, a thump, and then silence, followed by the shouting of onlookers. A competitor had fallen and died. She looked down and beheld the body of Ned Clement, the murderer who called himself the Scythe, and spent years in the labor camps of Calaculla for his crimes. A shudder went through her. Though the murderer of the Eye-Eater had made many of the champions quiet down, the sponsors certainly didn't seem to care that this test might very kill a few more of them. She shimmied up a drainpipe, her thighs clinging to the iron. Kane hooked his long rope around a leering gargoyle's neck and swung across an expanse of flat wall, landing on a balcony ledge 15 feet below the flag. She fought her frustration as she worked her way up higher and higher, following the course of the drainpipe. The other competitors shuffled along, following Kane's path. There were a few more shouts, and she looked down long enough to see that Grave was causing a backup because he couldn't manage to toss his rope around the gargoyle's neck as Kane had. Varin nudged the assassin aside and moved past him, easily securing his own rope. Now behind Grave, made to do the same. Now behind Grave, made to do the same, but Grave started cursing at him, and Knox stopped. Lifting his hand in a gesture of placation, smirking, Selina braced her blackened feet on a stabilizing bracket, holding the pipe in place. She'd soon be directly parallel to the flag, and then only 30 feet of bare stone would separate her from it. Selina eased farther up the pipe, her toes sticking to the metal. 15 feet below her pipe, a mercenary was clutching the horns of a gargoyle as he set about fastening his rope around its head. He seemed to be taking the faster route across a cluster of gargoyles. Then he'd had to swing onto a landing 18 feet away, before making his way to the other gargoyles on which Grave and Knox now quarreled. She was in no danger of him trying to scale the drainpipe to bother her. So inch by inch she moved up, the wind battering her hair this way and that. It was then that she heard Knox shout, and Selina looked in time to see Grave shove him from their perch atop the gargoyle's back. Knox swung aside, the rope wrapped around his middle, going taut as he collided with the castle wall below. Selina froze, her breath catching as Knox scraped his hands and feet against the stone to catch hold. But Grave wasn't done yet. He bent under the guise of adjusting his boot, and Selina saw a small dagger glint in the sunlight. How he'd gotten that weapon past his guards was a feat in itself. Selina's warning cry was carried away by the wind as Graves set about sawing Knox's rope from his tether on the gargoyle. None of the other champions nearly bothered to do anything, though Pelor paused for a moment before easing around Grave. If Knox died, it was one less competitor. And if they interfered, it might cost them this test. Selina knew she should keep moving, but something kept her rooted to the spot. Knox couldn't find a hole on the stone wall, and without a nearby ledge or gargoyle to grasp, he had nowhere to go but down. Once the rope broke, he'd fall. One by one, the thread of his rope snapped beneath Gray's dagger, and Knox, sensing the vibrations, looked up at the assassin in horror. If he fell, there was no chance of surviving. A few more slices of Graves' blade, and the rope would be severed entirely. The rope groaned. Selina moved. She slid down the drain pipe, the flesh of her feet and hands tearing open as the metal cut into her skin. But she didn't let herself think of the pain. The mercenary on the gargoyle below only had time to lean into the wall as she slammed onto the creature's head, gripping its horns to steady herself. The mercenary had already tied one end of his climbing rope around his gargoyle's neck. Now she seized it and tied the other around her own waist. The rope was long enough and strong enough, and the 4 gargoyles perched beside her would provide enough space to run. "Touch this rope and I'll gut you," she warned the mercenary, and readied herself. Knox shouted at Grave, and she dared a look to where the thief dangled. There was a sharp snap of rope breaking, and Knox's cry of fear and rage, and Selina took off, sprinting across the backs of the 4 gargoyles before she launched herself into the void. Oh, now she's trying to become a hero, guys. Chapter 22. Wind tore at her, but Selina kept her focus on Knox, falling so fast, so far from her outstretched hands. People shouted below, and the light bouncing of the glass castle blinded her, but there he was, just a hand's breadth from her fingers, his gray eyes wide, his arms swinging as if he could turn them into wings. In a heartbeat, her arms were around his middle, and she slammed him into him so hard that the breath was knocked from her chest. Together they plummeted like a stone, down, down, down toward the rising ground. Knox grabbed the rope, but even that wasn't enough to lighten the blinding impact on her torso as the rope went taut. She held on to him with every ounce of strength she had, willing her arms not to let him go. The rope sent them careening toward the wall. Selina hardly had the sense to lean her head away from the approaching stones, and the impact burst through her side and shoulder. She held tight to him, focusing on her arms and her too shallow breathing. They hung there, flat against the wall, panting as they looked at the ground 30 feet below. The rope held. "Lillian!" Knox said, gasping for breath. He pressed his face onto her hair. "Gods above!" But cheers erupted from below and drowned out his words. Selina's limbs trembled so violently that she had to focus on gripping Knox, and her stomach turned over and over and over. But they were still in the middle of the test, still expected to complete it, and Selina looked up. All the champions had stopped to see her save the falling thief. All except one who perched high, high above them. Excuse me. Selina could only gape as the flag was ripped down and Cain howled his triumph. More cheers rose up to meet them as Cain waved the flag for everyone to see. She seethed. She would have won if she'd taken the easy route. She would have gotten there in half the time it took Cain. But Kael told her to stay in the middle anyway. And her path had been far more impressive and demonstrative of her skills. Cain just had to jump and swing. Amateur scaling. Besides, if she had won, if she had gone the easy way, she wouldn't have saved Knox. She clenched her jaw. Could she get back up there in time? Perhaps Knox could take the rope, and she'd just scale with the wall with her bare hands. There were nothing worse than second place. But even as she thought it, Verin, Grave, Pelor, and Renault climbed the last few feet to the spot, tapping it with the hand before descending. "Lillian! Knox! Hurry up!" Brolo called, and she peered down at the weapons master. Selina scowled and started sliding her feet along the cracks in the stone, looking for a foothold. Her skin, raw and bleeding in spots, stung as she found a crevice for her toes to squeeze into. Carefully, she pulled herself up. "I'm sorry," Knox breathed, his legs knocking into hers as he also sought out a foothold. "It's fine," she told him, shaking, numb. Selina climbed back up the wall, leaving Knox to figure out the way on his own. Foolish. It'd been so foolish to save him. What had she been thinking? Yeah, what had she been thinking, guys? Seriously. Typical women, always trying to save men. I'm joking, by the way, guys. "Cheer up," Kael said, drinking from his glass of water. 18th place is fine. At least Knox plays behind you. Selina said nothing and pushed her carriage around on her plate. It had taken 2 baths and an entire bar of soap to get the tar off her aching hands and feet. Philippa had spent 30 minutes cleaning out and binding the wounds on each, and though Selina had stopped shaking, she could still hear the shriek and thump of Ned Clement hitting the ground. They'd carried his body away. She finished the task. Only his death had saved Knox from elimination. Grave hadn't even been scolded. There had been no rules against playing dirty. "You're doing exactly like we planned," Cale went on, "though I'd hardly consider your valiant rescue to be entirely discreet." She glanced at him. "Well, I still lost." While Dorian had congratulated her for saving Knox, and while the thief had hugged and thanked her again and again, only Cale had frowned when the test was over. Apparently, daring rescues weren't part of a jewel thief's repertoire. Cale's brown eyes shone golden in the midday sun. "Wasn't learning to lose gracefully part of your training?" "No," she said sourly. "Arabin told me that second place was just a nice title for the first loser." "Arabin Hamel?" Cale asked, setting down his glass. "The king of the assassins?" She looked toward the window, and the glittering expanse of Riftel barely visible beyond it. It was strange to think that Arabin was in the same city. That he was so close to her now. "You know he was my master, don't you?" "I'd forgotten," Cale said. Arabin would have flogged her for saving Knox, jeopardizing her own safety and place in this competition. "He oversaw your training personally?" "He trained me himself, and then brought in tutors from all over Irelea. The fighting masters from the rice fields of the southern continent, poison experts from the Bogdano jungle. Once he sent me to the silent assassins in the Red Desert. No price was too high for him. Or me," she added, fingering the fine thread on her bathrobe. "He didn't bother to tell me until I was 14 that I was expected to pay him back for all of it." "He trained you and then made you pay for it?" She shrugged, but was unable to hide the flash of anger. "Courtesans go through the same experience. They are taken in at young age and are bound to their brothels until they can earn back every coin that went into their training, upkeep, and wardrobe." "That's despicable," he spat, and she blinked at the anger in his voice, anger that for once was not directed at her. "Did you pay it back?" A cold smile that didn't reach her eyes spread across her face. "Oh, down to the last copper. And then he went out and spent all of it. Over 500,000 gold coins. Gone in 3 hours." Cale started from his seat. She shoved the memory down so deep that it stopped hurting. You still haven't apologized. Oh, you still haven't apologized, she said, changing the subject before Cale could inquire further. Feels like nursery kitten, still like Ian. Hey, Mew. Yep, no worries, sweetie. Apologized for what? For all the horrid things you said yesterday afternoon when I was sparring with Nehemia. He narrowed his eyes, taking the bait. I won't apologize for speaking the truth. The truth? You treated me like I'm a crazed criminal. And you said that you hated me more than anyone alive. I meant every word of it. However, a smile began to talk at her lips, and she soon found it reflected on his face. He tossed a piece of bread at her, which she caught in one hand and threw back at him. He caught it with ease. Idiot, she said, grinning now. Crazed criminal, he returned, grinning too. I really do hate you. At least I didn't come in 18th place, he said. Selina felt her nostrils flare, and it was all Cale could do to duck the apple she chucked at his head. It wasn't until later that Philippa brought the news. The champion who hadn't shown up for the test had been found dead in a servant's stairwell, brutally mauled and dismembered. Oh, wow. The new murder cast a pall over the next 2 weeks. I would never do such a thing. Battle! How could you think I would do that? I can't believe you'd say such a thing. Now okay, give me a second. I would never throw an apple at Ash. Never. How was that? I'm just afraid. Yeah, it would almost. What do you mean almost? I think that was perfectly stated. Don't you guys think? Guys, you gotta back me up here. It was totally clean. Come on. Oh, don't you dare. See? Oh, I have a feeling you are. Are you mocking me there, Simmons? You're supposed to be stand. Mm-hmm. Patzel, you asked me to defend myself with a straight face, and I am saying, with a straight face, I would never throw an apple at Ash. Now, a bucket full of water, that would be quite differently. No, I would never. Now, let's get back to reading, guys. The new murder cast a pall over the next 2 weeks and the two tasks they brought with them. Selina passed the tests, stealth and tracking, without drawing much attention to herself or risking her neck to save anyone. No other champions were murdered, thankfully, but Selina still found herself looking over her shoulder constantly, even though Kaon seemed to consider the two murders to be just unfortunate incidents. You're right. Every day she got better at running, going farther and faster, and managed to keep from killing Kane when he taunted her at training. The Crown Prince didn't bother to show his face in her rooms again, and she only saw him during the tests, when he usually just grinned and winked at her and made her feel ridiculously tingly and warm. What? Ginger! Why would you do that? I would never throw an apple at Ash. Never. Well, in game I've thrown lots of mud balls at Ash. But as I was saying earlier, ha- a bucket of water I would throw at Ash. No questions asked. But she had more important things to worry about. There were only 9 weeks left until the final duel, and some of the others, including Nox, were doing well enough that those 4 spots were starting to seem rather precious. Kane would definitely be there, but who would the other final 3 be? She'd always been sure she'd make it, but if she were honest with herself, Selina wasn't so sure anymore. So she's starting to have doubts, guys. Oh, be right back. And I'm back, guys. We have reached chapter 23, and I think it is a good place to take a hold and read again for Monday. We have been reading we've reading 9 chapters today. You guys have been greedy, wanting more. Always more. We are nearly halfway through the book. There are 55 chapters in the book. So, thank you for the follows. Thank you for listening. Thank you for all the trouble you guys have been making today while reading. So, I think it should be time for some ESO. Don't you guys think? I wish I could believe you there, Click. I wish I could believe you. Have you followed the
Clay, can I ask you something? Have you followed the story on Mondays before, or was this your first day? Bethel is never innocent. That is for sure. He is never innocent. First time. Okay. Then how was it? I would like to hear your opinion. No blushing, Miller. Shush. Very soothing. You make it sound like I'm very boring to listen to. Soothing. Uh huh. I don't know if that's a good thing. I actually don't know. Click. Um, yes, you get to vote. Because there are actually five more books, if I remember correctly, in this series with the assassin. So I will put it up for vote if we should continue with that or we should go for some other thing, but it could be ESO lore or something like that. If you guys even want me to continue reading on downtime. So, but we will No. You gotta be kidding me. To do Death's voice, all capitals. Uh, yeah, but is Death a man or woman? You think so? Oh oh. Oh oh. It's complicated. Yeah, I just noticed that my chat box is actually see-through, so you can see all my chat. That's not good. That is not good. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do this. I wanna be a rock star. Click. Are you when you're doing VMA? Are you doing it on your sword or a Nightblade or DK sword? Okay. And what is your time for easy mode? Yeah. No, I was not singing. Kinda. You can't call that singing. It was one line or something for a song. 45 minutes? Okay. I'm trying to beat my best time, 45 minutes and 18 seconds. But I have my old build. Old build. Welcome back, dear. Yeah, I need to talk to Chris. He has a burst build for his sword. I want to try it. Sorry about that, guys. I accidentally shot at the guard.
Vi må gerne have på skolen. Åbenbart.
Den der.
Hvorfor? Så skal jeg... Så vender det omvendt. Så vender tallene om.
Det gør det da ikke.
Med sundheden.
And my boys just came home.
Den sidder fint. Den sidder fint. Dejligt.
Okay, I just want to say, guys, don't use data prey at a guard when you are in the city. Hello, guys. Hello, guys. Hello. Hello, hello. Hello. Oh, I was afraid you guys didn't hear me. Oh, shush. I did not sneeze today. Wait, how? Because I actually said it should be invisible. Mhm. Yeah. Hmm. Oh, there. Sorry. Yes. No. It's the entire that is there now. It's my game footage. Mhm. Hmm. That is weird. Because I didn't fix it. I haven't done anything with it. Yeah, I know, but is it still showing? No, it's not. Okay. Now we just need to move the recent followers up. Oh, never mind. That can be done another day. It's hot. Hmm. It is. I just read in the news today that because of the humidity, we are at 45 degrees. Yeah. Hmm. Even though it's not really that hot, but the humidity makes it feel like it. Uh huh. It is freaking melting. Oi! Oh, for Pete's sake. Bless you. Mm. Daedra, die! Hmm. Yeah. I actually managed to burn the first boss. Whoop, whoop. Oh, yeah. Shh. You didn't see that. Uh huh. Battle, are you doing anything you should not? No. Okay. Uh-huh. Oh. Oh, Bethel. Hmm. Wait, why am I roll dodging all of a sudden? Round three. Oh, would you please? Meh. I did not just die there. Yeah. You know what? Fuck it. Go away. I do not die on second stage. Psst. That was annoying. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did this yesterday to get a friend her monster set, and she had been trying to get that for at least a few days. When she used a scroll, people would rage quit on her. Oh no! Come on, it's hard mode is not even hard. And you don't actually have to do hard modes to get the monster set. So why was she using the scroll? Just, just do the normal. Like, dispatchment dungeon. No, you don't have to do hard mode to get the set. You have to do hard mode if you're doing pledges, and if you want to get extra key, then yeah, you have to do hard mode. And better transmute crystal.
I'll be right back, guys. Alright, guys. It is actually extremely hot here at the moment, so I am gonna take a break and I might come back later. Um, uh, seriously, I can't. I can't even think straight at the moment.
Wow, man. Kitty, you sure
So
did
I
good.
am. We're gonna rate Hidi. Hidi is a awesome streamer doing end game content.
I'm gonna get you back in a second. I had it set for the 10.
So wait, what? Yeah, I am gonna do that. Take a cold shower. Oh, I love you too, sweetheart. You take good care, okay? Give Hidi some love. He is trying hard to go for partner push at some point. Oh, hey, Ego Hazardous. Oh, hi, sweetie. I did not see you there. I'm sorry.
You know I'm
Uh,
getting banned? What am I getting banned for?
so, but we are gonna raid Hidi, an Aussie streamer. Give him some love. Um, he's one of my favorite streamers. So,
Come here,
yeah.
straight.
You guys take care, and I will come back later, okay? Love you, and thank you for listening in on book reading. So, bye bye, guys.
Are you gonna streak? I don't because you'll just streak away like a fucking bitch. Dark Raiden, hello, how are you? How was your stream?